Get on your knees. Now. The words cut sharp through the night, slicing into the hum of distant traffic and the low buzz of streetlights overhead. Ava Johnson didn't move. The red and blue lights painted her face in shifting colors, flashing across her steady eyes, catching the quiet rise and fall of her breath. She stood on cracked asphalt, hands visible at her sides, shoulders relaxed, like she had already measured this moment and found no reason to fear it. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped forward, boots grinding lightly against gravel, his shadow stretching long across the pavement. His voice carried authority, practiced and cold. You heard me. Around them, 2 patrol cars idled, engines low and constant, doors open like silent witnesses. A second officer circled slightly to Ava's left, narrowing the space, tightening the invisible box around her. The air felt different here, heavier, like something unseen had already begun to shift. Ava's gaze didn't follow them. It stayed forward, calm, distant, as if she was listening to something beyond the flashing lights and clipped commands. A breeze slid down the empty street, brushing against her jacket, lifting a loose strand of hair across her cheek. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then silence returned, deeper than before. Brooks studied her, his jaw tightening, unsettled not by what she did, but by what she didn't do. No panic, no argument, just stillness. Search her, he said, sharper now, a note of impatience slipping through. One of the younger officers hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then stepped closer. His hand hovered, uncertain, inches from her sleeve. Ava finally spoke, her voice low, even, almost gentle against the tension. You don't want to do that. The words didn't rise. They didn't challenge. They simply landed, quiet and certain, like a fact already decided. The officer paused, fingers barely brushing fabric, and something in the air shifted again, subtle, but unmistakable. Brooks frowned. Do it. But the command didn't carry the same weight this time. The night seemed to listen instead. Ava's eyes lowered slightly, not in submission, but in focus, like she was counting something invisible, something approaching. The streetlight above flickered once, casting a brief shadow that stretched and snapped back. Then came the sound, soft at first, almost mistaken for wind against pavement, but too rhythmic, too precise. Footsteps. Fast. Controlled. Not chaos. Not panic. Something trained. The younger officer's hand stopped completely now. His head turned slightly toward the darkness beyond the reach of the lights. Brooks followed the movement, irritation flashing across his face before it hardened into something else, uncertainty. The sound grew clearer. Not one set. Multiple. Closing distance with perfect timing. Ava didn't move. Didn't look. Didn't react. But the corner of her expression shifted, just enough to reveal what the officers hadn't realized yet. This moment wasn't unfolding. It had already been set in motion. The sound did not rush. It approached with intention, each step landing in perfect rhythm against the pavement, measured, controlled, unmistakably trained. The younger officer swallowed, his hand still suspended in midair, fingers no longer reaching, no longer certain. Do you hear that? He murmured, almost to himself. Brooks did not answer right away. His eyes had already shifted past Ava now, scanning the dark edge of the street where the light gave up and shadows took over. The night felt tighter, like the space between breaths had narrowed. Ava stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, but something about her presence had sharpened, like a line drawn clean through the tension. She did not need to turn. She already knew. The footsteps grew louder, no longer something imagined, now undeniable. 3 distinct patterns, synchronized but separate, closing the distance with quiet precision. Not a single bark, not a single misstep, just movement that spoke of discipline and purpose. The younger officer took half a step back without realizing it. His shoulders stiffened, instincts catching up before his thoughts could. Sir, he said, voice tighter now. Brooks lifted a hand slightly, not to command, but to pause, as if the air itself had demanded silence. Then they appeared, out of the darkness, just beyond the reach of the flashing lights. 3 figures moved into view low, powerful, focused. Their coats caught the edge of the red and blue glow, muscles shifting beneath sleek fur, eyes locked forward with unbroken attention. They did not scatter. They did not hesitate. They moved as one, forming a line in front of Ava with a precision that did not need explanation. The street went still. Even the hum of the patrol cars seemed to fade into the background. The younger officer lowered his hand completely now, stepping back another inch, his breath shallow. "Those are not strays," he said. Quietly, the words barely leaving his lips. One of the dogs adjusted its stance, not aggressive, not restless, just alert, its gaze fixed, reading every movement, every shift in weight, every flicker of intent. Brooks felt it then, the subtle but undeniable shift in control. This was no longer his scene to command. His voice, when it came, was different, lower, measured. "Whose dogs are those?" Ava finally lifted her eyes, not toward him, but toward the space just ahead, where the line between shadow and light had been crossed. Her voice was calm, unchanged, but now it carried something deeper, something grounded in certainty. "They are not just dogs." The words settled into the silence, and for the first time since the lights had flashed and the commands had been given, no one moved forward. No one reached. No one spoke over her. The balance had shifted, and everyone standing there could feel it, even if they could not yet explain why. The silence stretched longer than it should have, thick and unmoving, like the night itself was holding its breath. The three dogs stood firm in front of Ava, their bodies aligned with quiet precision, not a single motion wasted, not a single sound breaking the stillness. Their presence did not explode into chaos. It settled into the space, steady and undeniable, like a line that could not be crossed. Officer Brooks shifted his weight, just slightly, but enough for the gravel beneath his boot to crunch louder than expected. The sound echoed more than it should have. One of the dogs turned its head a fraction, eyes locking onto him, not aggressive, not threatening, just aware. Completely aware. Brooks felt it in his chest, a tightening he could not explain. These were not animals reacting on instinct. They were reading him. Every movement, every hesitation, every ounce of authority he thought he still held. "Step back," he said, but the command lacked force, thinner than before, like it had lost something on the way out. The younger officer did not move. His gaze had dropped lower now, focusing on the collars, on the small metallic tags that caught the flashing light just enough to reveal markings. He leaned slightly, squinting, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Sir, those markings," he started, his voice uneven. Ava did not look at them. Her attention remained forward. Calm, grounded, as if the tension around her belonged to someone else entirely. A breeze passed again, colder this time, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant rain. One of the dogs shifted its stance, placing a paw forward with deliberate control, not advancing, not retreating, simply reinforcing the boundary that had already been drawn. The younger officer exhaled slowly, realization beginning to form. "Those are service tags," he said, louder now, the words carrying weight. "Military issue." Brooks frowned, his eyes narrowing as he looked again, really looked this time. The clean lines of the harnesses, the discipline in their posture, the complete absence of noise. No barking, no tension, just control. Perfect control. Ava finally spoke again, her voice steady, almost quiet enough to be missed, but no one missed it now. "They do not react to fear," she said. "They respond to command." The words landed differently this time. Not a warning, not a threat, a fact. Brooks felt the shift settle deeper into the ground beneath them, into the air between them, into the silence that no longer belonged to him. "Who are you?" he asked, and for the first time, the question did not sound like an interrogation. It sounded like something else, something closer to uncertainty. Ava lifted her gaze slightly, not meeting his eyes, but not avoiding them either. The red and blue lights flickered across her face again, but now they did not define her presence. They only passed over it. "Someone you should have listened to," she replied. The words were calm, without edge, without anger, but they carried more weight than anything said before. The younger officer took another step back, creating space without being told. Brooks did not move this time. He simply stood there, the authority he had arrived with no longer fitting the moment he was in. The dogs remained exactly where they were, silent, steady, unshaken, their presence turning the entire scene into something else entirely. Not a confrontation, not a command, a realization that had come too late to ignore. The weight of her words did not fade. It settled deeper, pressing into the silence until even the flashing lights felt distant, like they no longer belonged to this moment. Officer Brooks exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cooling night air, his posture no longer squared with certainty, but held in something closer to hesitation. The authority he carried into this street had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled what stood in front of him. Ava Johnson remained still, framed by the quiet strength of the three dogs at her side, their presence not loud, not aggressive, but absolute. The younger officer shifted again, this time deliberately stepping back, creating space that had not been there before. His radio crackled softly at his shoulder, a faint voice asking for status, but he did not respond. He could not take his eyes off the scene in front of him, off the precision of the animals, off the calm of the woman they protected. Brooks glanced at him, then back at Ava, then at the dogs again, as if trying to piece together something that should have been obvious but had been missed. Military, he said under his breath, the words sounding different now, stripped of assumption, carrying recognition instead. One of the dogs shifted its gaze slightly, scanning the perimeter, its awareness extending beyond the officers, beyond the cars, beyond the narrow slice of street illuminated by artificial light. It was not reacting. It was assessing. Ava's voice came again, quiet but steady, grounding the moment in something undeniable. They were trained to serve, she said. Not to intimidate, not to prove anything, just to protect when it matters. The words moved through the air slowly, deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Brooks swallowed, his jaw tightening, not in defiance, but in realization. The situation had never been what he thought it was. It had never been under his control. He had stepped into it with assumptions, with authority, with a narrative already decided. And now that narrative was unraveling in front of him, piece by piece, without force, without conflict, without anything he could push back against. The younger officer spoke again, softer now. Sir, we should probably. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Brooks lifted his hand slightly, not to command, but to acknowledge, a small motion that carried more meaning than any order he had given earlier. He took a step back. Just one. But it changed everything. The space between them widened, the tension shifting from confrontation to something quieter, something reflective. Ava did not move forward. She did not claim the space. She simply remained where she was, grounded, steady, unchanged by the shift that had taken place around her. The dogs held their positions, perfectly still, their presence now less like a barrier and more like a quiet statement that no longer needed to be proven. The flashing lights continued to pulse, but they no longer defined the moment. They only illuminated it. Brooks looked at Ava again, this time without the weight of suspicion, without the edge of control. Just a question, unspoken but clear. Ava met it calmly, her expression unchanged, her voice soft but firm as she finally answered the question he had not fully known how to ask. You saw a situation, she said. I saw responsibility. The words settled into the night, and for the first time since the moment began, nothing needed to escalate, nothing needed to be forced. Everything that had to be understood already was. The street did not return to normal. It shifted into something quieter, something heavier, like a moment stretched just beyond its natural end. Officer Brooks lowered his hand completely now, letting it fall to his side, the motion slow, deliberate, as if even that small movement needed to be reconsidered. The authority in his stance had softened, not gone, but no longer leading. The younger officer glanced between Ava and the dogs again, his breathing steadier now but still careful, like he understood that this moment required more listening than action. The radio at his shoulder crackled again, a distant voice asking for an update, but he reached up and turned the volume down without answering. This was no longer something that could be explained in quick words or standard procedure. Ava remained where she stood, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded in something that did not need to prove itself. The three dogs stood with her, not pressing forward, not retreating, their stillness now more powerful than any movement could have been. One of them shifted slightly, its ears tilting toward a faint sound in the distance, then settling again, its attention returning to the present. Everything about them spoke of discipline, of training that went deeper than commands, something built over time, over trust. Brooks took another small step back, creating space that he no longer felt the need to close. His eyes moved over the scene again, but this time not searching for control, not looking for a reason to act, but trying to understand what had already happened. "We got a call," he said finally, his voice quieter now, less certain, as if he was testing the words before letting them go. "Suspicious activity. Someone said," he stopped. The rest of the sentence did not fit anymore. Ava listened without interrupting, her expression calm, patient, as if she had heard versions of this before. The flashing lights continued to sweep across the pavement, reflecting off the metallic tags on the dogs' collars, each brief glint revealing markings that told a story Brooks had not taken the time to read before. The younger officer spoke again, more firmly now, as if the realization had settled fully. "Sir, these are registered military K-9 units. They are not here by accident." The statement hung in the air, clear, undeniable. Brooks nodded once, slowly, the motion carrying acceptance more than agreement. The assumptions he had walked in with no longer held. The situation had changed, not because something escalated, but because something had been revealed. Ava shifted her weight slightly, a small movement that signaled readiness, not tension. The dogs mirrored her subtly, not moving forward, but aligning with her as if connected by something deeper than commands. Brooks looked at her again, this time without the sharp edge that had defined his earlier gaze. "You could have said that from the start," he said, though the words lacked accusation. Ava's eyes met his briefly, steady and clear. "I did," she replied softly. The simplicity of it settled into the silence, leaving no room for argument. The younger officer exhaled, almost a quiet release, his shoulders dropping just enough to show the shift. Brooks glanced down for a moment, then back up, the weight of the situation no longer something he could direct, only something he had to acknowledge. Another pause followed, longer this time, not tense, but reflective. The streetlights hummed faintly overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a car passed, its sound fading quickly into the night. Ava finally took a small step forward, not toward them, but past the space that had once held her in place. The dogs moved with her instantly, silent, precise, their formation adjusting without a word, without hesitation. Brooks did not stop her. He did not speak. He simply watched as the moment moved forward without him, as control gave way to understanding, and as the scene he had tried to. Command resolved itself without force, without conflict, leaving behind something far more difficult to ignore than any confrontation could have been. The night did not rush to fill the space she left behind. It lingered, stretched thin between what had just happened and what had not yet settled. Ava Johnson walked forward at a steady pace, her steps quiet against the pavement, measured in a way that did not need urgency. The three dogs moved with her, perfectly aligned, their formation adjusting with subtle precision, never breaking rhythm, never looking back. The red and blue lights continued to flicker behind her, casting long shadows that followed for a moment before fading into the dark edges of the street. Officer Brooks remained where he stood, his posture no longer rigid, his presence no longer commanding. He watched her go, not with suspicion, not with authority, but with something unfamiliar, something quieter, something that did not come with instructions. The younger officer shifted beside him, glancing once more at the path Ava had taken, then back at Brooks, as if waiting for a direction that no longer felt necessary. "Sir," he began, but the word did not lead anywhere. Brooks did not respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the space ahead, on the fading outline of a woman who had never raised her voice, never stepped out of line, yet had changed the entire direction of the moment without force. A soft wind moved through the street again, carrying the faint sound of her footsteps for a few seconds longer before they disappeared completely. The hum of the patrol cars returned, low and steady, filling the silence that had been left behind, but it did not restore what had shifted. It only reminded them of what had been interrupted. Brooks finally exhaled, a slow release that seemed to carry more than just breath. He reached up and adjusted his collar slightly, a small, almost unconscious movement, as if trying to return to something familiar, something structured, something that made sense. But the moment did not reset. It stayed with him. The younger officer looked down briefly, then back up, his voice quieter now. "She never resisted." Brooks nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "No," he said. The word was simple, but it held weight. Not resistance. Not defiance. Something else entirely. Something that had not fit into the way he had approached the situation. He glanced toward the empty stretch of pavement where Ava had stood, then to the spot where the dogs had formed their line. Nothing remained there now. No marks. No signs. Just an ordinary street under ordinary lights. But it did not feel ordinary anymore. The space had changed. The understanding had changed. The assumptions he had carried into the moment no longer held their shape. The radio crackled again, louder this time, asking for status, repeating the call. Brooks lifted it slowly, pressing the button, but he did not speak right away. His eyes lingered on the direction Ava had gone, on the quiet path that had swallowed her presence without a trace. For a brief moment, he considered the simplicity of what had just unfolded. No escalation, no force, just clarity, just truth revealed in a way that left no room to argue. He lowered the radio slightly, his voice finally coming through, steady but different. "Situation resolved," he said. He released the button and let his hand fall back to his side. The words were accurate, but incomplete. There was no code for what had actually happened. No report that could capture the shift he had felt, the way control had slipped quietly out of his hands without confrontation, without resistance. The younger officer nodded slowly, as if he understood that too, even if he could not explain it. The lights continued to flash for a few more seconds. Then one of the patrol cars powered down, the red and blue fading into a softer glow. The street returned to darkness, but not the same darkness as before. Brooks stood there a moment longer, then turned slightly, his gaze moving away from where Ava had disappeared. But the feeling remained, settled somewhere deeper than procedure, deeper than authority. A realization that did not need to be spoken to be understood. The patrol cars eventually went quiet, one engine shutting off, then the other, leaving behind a low hum of cooling metal and the faint ticking sound of heat settling into steel. The flashing lights faded, and with them, the illusion of control that had filled the street just minutes earlier. Officer Brooks stood beside the open door of his cruiser, one hand resting on the frame, his fingers tapping once, then stilling, as if even that small motion felt out of place now. The younger officer leaned, slightly against the hood, eyes still fixed down the road where Ava had disappeared, as though expecting something more, some explanation that would arrive late and make sense of it all. But nothing came. Just the empty stretch of asphalt, dim streetlights, and the quiet weight of a moment that had already passed. Brooks glanced down at his hands, then at the pavement, then back up again, his thoughts moving slower than usual, heavier. He replayed it in his mind without meaning to. The stillness, the voice, the way she had not raised her tone, not once. The way those dogs had moved without hesitation, without confusion, without fear. It had not been a confrontation. It had been a correction. That was the word that settled in his chest, quiet but firm. A correction he had not expected and had not known how to handle. "We did not even ask," the younger officer said after a long pause, his voice low, almost reflective. Brooks did not respond immediately. The words hung there, simple, undeniable. Not a defense. Not an accusation. Just truth. He shifted his weight slightly, looking toward the spot where Ava had stood, as if something might still be there to explain it. "We assumed," the younger officer added, softer now. Brooks exhaled slowly, nodding once. "Yes," he said. The admission was small, but it carried more than any report he could file. The streetlight above them flickered again, casting a brief shadow that stretched and snapped back, and in that moment, Brooks realized how quickly everything had been decided before he had even spoken to her. A call, a description, a location, and then a conclusion. It had felt automatic, routine, necessary, but standing there now, with the quiet settling around him, it felt incomplete, like something important had been skipped. The younger officer pushed himself off the hood of the cruiser, standing straighter, his expression no longer tense, but thoughtful. "Those dogs," he said, glancing back down the road. "They trusted her completely." Brooks followed his gaze, eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in understanding. "And she trusted them," he replied. The realization settled deeper this time. Not control, not force, trust, built somewhere long before this moment. Built in ways that could not be seen at a glance, could not be judged in a few seconds under flashing lights. Brooks rubbed the back of his neck, a quiet habit, his mind still turning. Military does not just give that kind of trust away, he said. The younger officer shook his head slightly. No, sir. Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Less tense, more aware. The kind of silence that came after something had been learned, even if it had not been fully understood yet. Brooks looked down at the radio still in his hand, then clipped it back into place without speaking. There was nothing left to report that would matter. Not in the way that mattered now. He turned slightly, closing the door of the cruiser with a soft click, the sound echoing faintly in the empty street. Next time, the younger officer said carefully, we ask first. Brooks paused, his hand resting on the door for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded. Next time, he agreed. The words were quiet, but they carried something new. Not just procedure, not just protocol, something closer to intention. He stepped away from the cruiser, the weight in his chest not gone, but changed, shaped into something that would follow him long after the night ended. Down the street, beyond the reach of the dim lights, Ava and the dogs were already gone, but the space they had passed through remained altered, like a line had been drawn and understood without ever needing to be spoken aloud. The street eventually emptied, but the moment did not leave with it. Hours later, inside the quiet hum of the precinct, fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over desks lined with reports, coffee cups, and the low murmur of late-night shifts. Officer Brooks sat at his station, the chair slightly reclined, a report open in front of him that remained unfinished. The cursor blinked on the screen, steady, patient, waiting for words that did not come easily. He had written the basics. Time, location, call received, situation resolved. But every time his fingers hovered over the keys, something in him paused, as if the truth of what happened could not be reduced to standard lines and checkboxes. Across the room, the younger officer leaned against a desk, arms folded loosely, his expression quieter than before, thoughtful in a way that had not been there at the start of the shift. You going to file it like that? He asked, nodding toward the screen. Brooks glanced at it, then back at him. How else would I file it? He replied, though the answer did not sound certain. The younger officer shrugged slightly, then walked a few steps closer, lowering his voice. It was not just a routine call. The words landed simply, without pressure, but they carried weight. Brooks leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his hands clasped together as he looked at the report again. The glow of the monitor reflected in his eyes, but behind it, something else moved. Something slower. We responded to a call, he said, almost as if reminding himself. We assessed the situation. He stopped there. The younger officer waited, giving the silence space to settle. Brooks exhaled, a quiet breath that carried more than fatigue. We assumed the situation, he corrected, the words coming out softer this time. The younger officer nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. That was the part that could not be written down easily, the part that had shifted everything. Brooks leaned back in his chair again, the soft creak breaking the stillness. He looked around the room briefly, at the familiar routine of paperwork and quiet conversations, at the structure that had always made things clear. But tonight, that clarity felt thinner. She never argued, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Not once. The younger officer leaned against the desk beside him, his gaze steady. She did not have to, he replied. Brooks nodded slowly, the realization settling deeper now. Not resistance, not defiance, just presence, just certainty, the kind that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. He turned back to the screen, his fingers finally moving, but not to fill in the same empty lines. He added a sentence, simple, direct. No threat identified. Then he paused again, staring at the words. They were accurate, but they did not carry the full weight of what had happened. Because the threat had never been her. That was the part that stayed with him. That was the part that did not fit into the report. The younger officer glanced at the screen, then back at Brooks. You ever think about how fast we decide? He asked quietly. Brooks did not answer right away. He did not need to. The answer was already there, sitting between them, unspoken but understood. He saved the report, the soft click of the keyboard echoing faintly in the room, then closed the file. The cursor disappeared. The moment was recorded, but not explained. Brooks stood slowly, adjusting his jacket, his movements more deliberate now, as if something inside him had shifted into a different rhythm. Next time, he said, almost under his breath. The younger officer looked at him. Next time what? Brooks met his gaze briefly, then looked away, toward the window where the night stretched out beyond the glass, quiet and endless. We listened first. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. The younger officer nodded once, and neither of them spoke again. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the small shift that had taken place. But inside that room, something had changed in a way that would not be undone, something that would follow them into the next call, the next decision, the next moment where assumptions waited quietly to take control. The city had settled into the kind of quiet that only came just before dawn, when the streets were not empty but softer, as if everything moved with less urgency. A pale gray light stretched slowly across the horizon, touching rooftops, slipping through windows, and finding its way into places that had been hidden in the dark just hours before. Ava Johnson walked along a narrow sidewalk lined with aging brick buildings, her steps steady, her pace unhurried. The three dogs moved beside her, their formation no longer tight, but relaxed, their shoulders brushing close as they matched her rhythm with quiet loyalty. The world around them looked ordinary again. Early commuters, distant traffic, the faint hum of a city waking up, but something in the air felt different, like a moment had passed through it and left a trace that could not be seen, only felt. Ava paused at the corner, the soft glow of a streetlight flickering above her as it gave way to the rising daylight. One of the dogs sat calmly at her side without being told, the others standing alert but at ease, their eyes scanning not for threat, but for understanding. Ava rested her hand gently on the nearest one, her fingers brushing through its fur in a slow, familiar motion, not as a command, not as reassurance, but as acknowledgement. They had done what they were trained to do. They had stood there, ground without force, without fear, without needing to prove anything beyond what was already true. A passing car slowed briefly, the driver glancing at the quiet scene before continuing on, unaware of the weight that had been carried through the night. Ava looked ahead again, her expression calm, unchanged, as if the moment that had unfolded behind her had not shaken her, but simply confirmed something she had always known. That dignity did not need permission. That strength did not need volume. That truth, when it stood still long enough, could shift even the most rigid assumptions without raising its voice. The dogs rose as she stepped forward again, moving with her seamlessly, their presence no longer a barrier, no longer a statement, just a quiet extension of trust built over time. The first light of the sun broke over the edge of the buildings, casting a warm glow across the sidewalk, stretching their shadows long behind them. Ava did not look back. She did not need to. Whatever had needed to change had already begun. Behind her, far across the city, in a quiet precinct room and an empty street now washed in early morning light, two officers carried a moment they could not fully explain, one that would follow them into every decision that came after. But here, in the calm of a new day, there was no tension left, no conflict waiting to rise. Just movement, just breath, just the steady sound of footsteps moving forward. Ava turned the corner and disappeared into the light, the dogs at her side, their silhouettes fading into the brightness of morning, leaving behind nothing but the quiet certainty that some moments do not need to be spoken to be understood, and some changes do not need to be seen to be real.